Welcome, Michael Hill, editor of Infosecurity Magazine, to Judges on Fire, the Tech Trailblazers podcast that interviews our judges. So welcome on board, new with us for our 9th edition. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Brilliant. So it'd be great to understand, so that anybody who doesn't know Infosecurity Magazine and perhaps has not dealt with you or come across you before, to give us an overview of the publication and also, yourself and the stuff that interests you.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Michael Hill. I'm the editor of Infosecurity Magazine. I've been with the magazine now 4.5 years. It will be 5 years kind of in December. So I actually came on board as the deputy editor in that role for a couple of years, back when Eleanor Dalloway was the editor, and she had been for several years. And then she went away to have a second child, and I stepped up into the role of editor for that maternity leave. And then when she came back into the business, there was a bit of a restructuring with her moving into a kind of director editorial role. So I actually then took on the editor role on a full-time basis, and that's what I've been doing for the last two and a half years, really. So information security. We are very much focused on cybersecurity. So the security of people's data, data privacy. So we cover a lot of things within that topic. So things like the big breaches that companies are having. Again, data privacy implications, data privacy rights. We try and have a real mix of content in our magazine, which is obviously daily news, but we try to write a lot of interviews with industry figures. We do weekly webinars as well, sometimes 2 webinars a week, where we explore various topics really within the sector. So we're mostly online, and that's where the majority of our topic lives, obviously, but we do actually still print as well. So we print the magazine quarterly. Several years ago, it was more regularly than quarterly. It was once a month, I believe, but obviously print media kind of is what it is now. But it's nice to still have a physical print issue that, like I say, goes out 4 times a year. And we're quite proud of that. And we put a lot of work into that every few months. So then that's kind of us in a nutshell, really.
Brilliant. And do you want to give us a little bit of, how did Michael end up being a journalist? How did you get involved with cybersecurity? A little bit of your background, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. So at university, I studied English Lit with creative writing, and even though that was quite a long time ago now, it was always I always wanted to be, working editorially, or to be writing, or to be involved in publishing. It was something I always found quite interesting, quite enjoyable. Had a great time at uni. Came out of uni, as a lot of people do, wanting to kind of get into the journalism field and stuff. But I think a lot of people do come out of university hoping to become a journalist. It seems like a cool, fun career to have, jetting all over the world. You grew up watching films like Superman, who was Clark Kent, was a journalist and stuff. But reality was I found it difficult to get any kind of paid work, internship out of uni, just because there were so many people looking to do it. And so I looked at that for a few months and ended up taking just an admin job in insurance, just a local one, just for something to do, thinking I'd do it for a year or so and then try and have another go at writing. A couple of years down the line, best part 2.5 years, I was still in that same job. So then made the decision that I wanted to give the writing another go, and had a look around for internships and entry level jobs. And I was really lucky to get one at a media company that's actually called This Is Our Town. So it was more of a lifestyle media brand, but they covered everything, from sports, from food and drink, theatre, general lifestyle and things as well, fashion. So got an internship there where I managed to stay for 6 months. Obviously, it was expenses paid only, so it was an interesting time moving from a reasonably well-paid full-time job into that, but it was something I wanted to give a go to. Luckily, it went really well, and from then I kind of moved quite quickly around the publishing sector. I moved to work at the University of Law in Surrey, where in the publishing department for about 6 months. I then moved again to work for a medical publication, which was actually orthopedic surgery. So that wasn't so much writing, that was more a lot of editing, proofing, getting things into house style, and working quite heavily on the publication process of the different journals. So I was there for a year, and then was looking to move again, and this is when cybersecurity came up, I guess. Saw an advert for a deputy editor. I thought, I'd like to kind of have that step up and move into a more senior role. I liked the idea that it was going to involve more writing than I had been doing for the last year or so. But in terms of my sort of tech background and cybersecurity interest, it wasn't something that was particularly passionate about previously. I mean, I'd always liked technology and stuff and found it interesting, but I think it was one of those things where I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to write and tell stories. The cybersecurity topic was just something that just seemed to kind of just find me, really. And my knowledge of it when I first went in or came in to the magazine was very little. I knew who McAfee was, John McAfee, because he was a bit of a playboy guy you see in the newspapers a bit. And I knew what antivirus was, but it was all quite new to me. So it was quite a steep challenge to come into the industry. But what I would say the last kind of 4.5 years is the industry is entirely different than what I think any kind of vague perceptions that I had years ago of what information security is and what IT security is. It's luckily for me anyway, I found it not overly technical. It's actually more kind of rooted in human behaviors and human psychology, which I actually find is really, really interesting, with a kind of layer of tech, I guess, beneath it. So no background in tech or cybersecurity, but here I am, I guess.
There we go. Well, obviously things have changed a little bit in the years since you've sort of taken on that initial role. And I think certainly from my exposure to cybersecurity professionals, they do, surprisingly, they're very open. A lot of them who are very high profile use things like Twitter. And so you do get exposure quite quickly to a lot of the ins and outs of the whole thing. There are a lot of very well-rounded, very experienced cybersecurity professionals who I'm sure are more than happy to give you their opinions. So obviously you're joining us to be one of the judges, and you'll be looking primarily at the cybersecurity startups. And I know obviously for Infosecurity Magazine is targeted quite aggressively by the cybersecurity startups, as well as obviously other cybersecurity vendors. How have you found the kind of things that are interesting? Because I think there's something like, according to Crunchbase, 15,000 cybersecurity, God forbid, startups, which is a phenomenal amount of organizations who are coming up with potentially new or Me Too stuff, which is potentially better, cheaper, faster, more comprehensive. What kind of things have you seen, say, over the last few years that you think have been particularly interesting, or initiatives from the cybersecurity world?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in what the number of startups that are in the field. I think cybersecurity sector is a field that's evolved a lot dramatically in the last 10 years if you compare it with other industries, which have had a lot longer, I guess, to kind of progress, maybe a bit slower. But one particular thing, particularly from my perspective, when it comes to startups and new companies, is because cybersecurity is a sector that does change and evolve so quickly, that actually it relies heavily on new companies who kind of come into the market with new ideas. They see new niches, they have new approaches to things. And I think that's actually key. I think it's more key in an industry like cybersecurity and IT tech because of how quickly it's moving. So when you come across new companies that are actually, for me personally, and this is something I've been seeing the last few years, whose initial focus is really kind of on the user, on sort of looking at authentication, I guess, but with the user in mind. So I think there's been a tendency in the past where authentication has kind of not put the user front of mind, and it's kind of been too focused on cumbersome processes just to ensure security, and leaving the user in a bit of a limbo where they try to work around it or they just avoid it altogether. So I do like to see companies that are really coming forward with these ideas about putting the user at the forefront of the technology they're putting together, to give a more kind of streamlined, user-friendly experience, which I think if you can master that, you'll result in better security. And if you don't, then you're going to have issues with, like I say, users finding workarounds or just avoiding the technology altogether because they find it slow, it slows them down. So yeah, that's been something that's been particularly interesting to me the last couple of years around the authentication piece, but with the user kind of front of mind.
Mm. And certainly from, looking at what will be happening over the sort of the coming months as we sort of opened up for entries now, and then obviously in sort of September we'll be closing off, and then you'll be getting a chance to have a look at it. What's new for this year is that we're actually going to give the shortlisted companies an opportunity to do kind of a lightning talk on something like, Zoom or Teams or whatever. So hopefully that's something you may be able to join us for the cybersecurity shortlist as well, just so you can get a bit of an insight from them. Sort of moving forward, I think one of the things that, would be good to see is there anything in particular that will be of interest to you? Are you going to get particularly excited if you see certain challenges being addressed, certain obstacles being overcome from a cybersecurity? Because obviously you talk to a lot of end users as well. You talk to CISOs, you talk to IT security professionals, on a very regular basis. You interview them, you talk to them with regards to what they're doing. What kind of things do you think you will be resonating for you, where you go, yes, a few people have said this is an issue and this is something that addresses that?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a few areas that kind of stand out to me. And if you'd have asked me 6 months, 8 months ago, they would have stood out to me then as well. So that's very much looking at the cloud, for example. A lot of people that we speak to, they bring up the cloud as a real area of challenge. It's growing again at such a pace, but a security angle there, particularly with, outsourcing to cloud services and stuff, ensuring that security balance is right. That's quite a challenge for companies, I think. So certainly in the cloud, and I would actually kind of tie in with that a bit of IoT as well. That's always been interesting to me. And again, it's another thing which is growing and getting bigger all the time. We get more and more devices which are built with connectivity as standard, but there does still seem to be this kind of issue with manufacturing side, security just not being up to the standard that it needs to be in built. So something that takes into particular consideration the cloud and IoT, I'd find very interesting. But obviously, given this year and the way that things have turned out and have happened and the place we find ourselves in now, something that's also particularly interesting is, that what's going to become, or what is the norm now and what's going to be normal for the next couple of years, which is a far more agile remote workforce. And with that, new approaches to security. So I think now's a great time for startups and younger companies looking at the key challenges that organizations are facing all over the world. And that really is, how can we improve security? So how can we adapt and flourish in what's considered the new normal, with the understanding that workforces are going to be far more agile than they ever were, far more remote. And the technology piece, how do you use, you've got all these kind of apps growing now, Zoom, and like we talk about there, how can we use these new forms of communication securely? But also companies are going to have to reassess their security approaches, security strategies. How do they deal with responding to events that occur? Who handles that process? So it's definitely going to be an interesting time, I would say, the rest of this year, and for me, probably the next couple of years going forward in terms of how companies adapt.
So one of the interesting, because IoT is one of our categories as well, so there might be some interesting companies coming forward with regards to that as well. Cloud also, cybersecurity and cloud have been our most popular categories for entries, and also the male and female Tech Trailblazers, which is something we introduced a couple of years ago. But I'm kind of curious, because AI has always been seen as being a bit of this is going to make cybersecurity, this is going to really drive things forward. Are you seeing that as being an interesting area that you think might be where a lot of the startups will be playing into?
Yeah, again, so AI is one of those topics that, it does come up a lot in conversations, back obviously when we could all go to physical events and stuff, it was, you used to see a lot of conversations around it and you used to see a lot of reference to it. I think it's an interesting one. I think that's been quite a few years now, that's been kind of the buzzword. And I do think it's it's slowly maturing to the point where I think companies are kind of starting to get a bit of a grip on what does it actually mean? What does AI mean? What does machine learning mean? What does automation mean? So I think one thing I would say with that is there needs to be, I think, greater understanding on the different facets of AI, because it isn't just robots that learn. And I think it's kind of helping companies understand what level of AI, artificial intelligence, they can use within their company that works for them. So is it kind of more deep learning? Is it just a machine learning angle? So that's interesting. But I think it's something the companies still need support on, because it is still evolving. And I think it needs a bit of, not standardization, but I think companies need a bit of structure to fully understand it and fully use it, and sort of come away a bit from the buzzword thing of AI, and maybe kind of drill down a bit into, okay, what does it actually mean?
Yeah, because it is seen as a lot of automation within the process as well, isn't it? Cool. And we have a structure which gives points for certain elements. And what would be your advice? Because I know that you've been involved with awards previously. You obviously get to look at an awful lot of sort of pitches from people talking about what they think, your readers are going to be interested in. What do you think would be your advice to people who are submitting? What do you think you want them to focus on, and what do you want them to sort of prove to you? What evidence do they need to provide?
Well, yeah, for me, and like I mentioned earlier, I think a big element of modern security, successful security, is the human side of things, is fully understanding that no matter what technology you're implementing, no matter what you're trying to achieve, you need your humans to be effective and kind of on board with it. And I think they need support with doing that. I do think in the past there's been a tendency for security to kind of forego the user human element. I think that if you can find a way of securing things clearly, and you're able to kind of clearly show what you're trying to achieve without hampering the user's experience, at the end of the day, employees and users, whether they're at work or at home, they just want to get on and do what they want to do. But I think if you can come up with a way of kind of keeping them at the front of what you are trying to achieve, and involving them in the process, so that they don't feel as though they're having to jump through hoops just to try and do a simple thing. So I guess it's kind of streamlining the authentication and identity management process, really. But like I say, always having the user, the human user, at the heart of what you want to achieve from your security approaches, really.
Fantastic. So, kind of looking beyond that, we like to have a little bit of fun in these things, not just talk about the awards, not just talk about what you do on a day-to-day basis. And you've kind of almost answered this next question inadvertently. So just to kind of give a bit of a personal spin on things, what superhero would you be if you were going to be a superhero? You've already mentioned one, so I think you might have already marked your card with regard to that.
Well, that's a good point, actually. There's so many to choose from, and I'm a big superhero fan. I've always had a real soft spot for Spider-Man. Even though I mentioned Superman earlier, I don't think I quite look like a Clark Kent, but I think I could probably pass for a Peter Parker. So I'm going to say Spider-Man. Yeah, let's stick with that.
Yeah, cool. Well, now you're Spidey.
Surfing the web.
Indeed. Both literally. Well, certainly literally. So beyond that, if we look at stuff to the future? I mean, obviously there will be startups that you'll be seeing that are kind of in the reality of today. But if you look at sort of the broader technology beyond cybersecurity, what do you think? What would be your predictions of what we'll be seeing over the next sort of decade or so that will be big advances in technology?
Well, a decade, a long time for technology. That's the thing.
Very long time. Well, you can rein it back a bit.
Well, I do think eventually the AI piece will kind of all tie together. I think it's getting there. But like I kind of mentioned, I won't dwell on it, but I think there's a lot of confusion. It's not entirely clear exactly how AI technology works and how we can actually fully use it to its full potential. I also think that we're going to see wider standardization around technology. So IoT, for example. And I'm not saying this is going to be an easy thing to ever achieve. I do think there needs to be some kind of global, standardization around the manufacturing of IoT devices, particularly when you look at kind of how much regulations are actually evolving and changing now. Obviously, GDPR a couple of years ago. This year we had the CCPA, which is over in California. So I think you're going to see a lot more countries, a lot more regions across the world looking to implement kind of more strict regulations. And I think it's going to, again, you're going to have to find a standardization of how those regulations can work together with regards to technology and data privacy. Again, yes, IoT, I mean, vehicles and stuff, again, it's something that's been discussed for quite a long time now, but it is slowly getting there. And industrial infrastructures as well, more and more of those are becoming smart facilities. But again, that's highly dangerous when you're talking about critical infrastructure that's, a nation or, a town or a city is dependent on. How can you ensure they are secure as well? So I think there's going to be a lot. I do think, a lot of good things are going to happen in the next 10 years. And I do think, automation at its basic principle is going to be behind a lot of that. I also think that there'll be more input and more focus put on recruiting into the security industry and tech industry from kind of more diverse backgrounds and stuff. I think there has to be. I think some good work's been done on that in the last few years in terms of kind of trying to address the gender imbalance. I think it's getting better, but there's many forms of diversity, and I think actually more and more companies now are seeing the benefits of diverse workforces, and that's something which could be helped along the way with far more remote workforces where maybe people can work the large majority of the time remotely and don't need to come into the office at all, which maybe a year or so ago companies weren't really on board with that. So who knows, maybe that kind of remote move could actually help make the workforce more diverse.
Definitely. And I mean, certainly, obviously, we have our male and female tech trailblazers as categories. And I certainly think for having looked at it from the outside, I think one of the things that perhaps has been the leveler is the ability for people to work remotely. And obviously, hopefully, kids will be going back to school. So returning to work mums or returning to work dads will be able to not have to come into an office, and that will make childcare issues, the things around balancing work-life balance, it is going to sort of level, a bit more level playing field across for everybody. There'll be less international travel, so there'll be less pressure for people to be away from home. So a lot of the things I think which have possibly been barriers, particularly for women as new mums or existing mums, to having to make a compromise. We're now not having to necessarily do that, and we have shown that people can be just as effective doing what we're doing here, not meeting for a coffee down at Soho or in New York for an event or wherever that may be, but you can actually get the job done in different ways. It doesn't have to be the way that we've always done it. This has made us rethink about how we're doing things.
That's right, it has.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for joining us as part of our esteemed judging panel for our 9th edition in 2020. So it's great to have you on board, Michael. And thanks for joining us for the podcast as well. So, being a judge is on fire. It'll be great for people to understand a little bit more about what you're interested in. So thank you for taking the time for that.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.